Well, let's start. I will introduce the speakers to you. And first, I will give the floor to Isabella Ducros. Isabella Ducros comes from Rome, where she obtained a 3-year degree in philosophy at the Tor Vergata University with a thesis on aesthetics. She then obtained a master degree in visual arts at the Mater Studiorum of Bologna with a thesis in cultural heritage law. She enriched her university studies with 2 years of Erasmus exchanges, one at the Ruprecht Karl University of Heidelberg and one at the Humboldt University of Berlin. And today, she is attending the Master Economics and Management for Art and Culture in Milan. She's dealing with topics as ethics, sustainability, museology, cultural design, management for cultural institutions. So Isabella, I give you the floor. I hope you are able to share your screen with us.
Yes, I should be. Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see it?
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about my research. Thank you, Catherine, also. This presentation summarized some elements from my master thesis, which took place in November 2012, entitled Restitution of Cultural Heritage to Former Colonies, the Italian Case. The presentation is divided into 3 parts. The first will be a brief introduction to the history of Italian colonialism. The second will focus on a particular case of restitution, that of the Stele of Axum. The third is a study of an example of a museological solution in case of non-return of the cultural heritage. The Italian invasion can be divided into 3 major periods. The first begins in 1885 with the landing in Massawa, Eritrea, when Italy enters in the Eritrean and part of the Ethiopian territory.
Eccola, sta parlando.
In 1896, the Italian advance was halted with the defeat at Adwa. Between 1911 and 1912, Italy launched the first invasion of Tripolitania against the Ottoman Empire, which at the time occupied Libya. In 1913, the advance was stopped by anti-colonial resistance. It must be remembered that the rebellion was also fought with the creation and use of concentration camps. In 1930, Italy invaded the region of Fezzan and Cyrenaica. A heroic figure of the resistance emerges, the Sinusite guerrilla leader Omar al-Mukhtar, who died in battle in 1931. From 1935 to 1930, Italy conquered Ethiopia using banned weapons such as asphyxiating gas and mustard gas. In 1941, British forces defeat Italy and conquer Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia, establish a protectorate and the resettlement of the deposed Negus Haile Selassie. I will now present to you the most important restitution case for Italy. I've chosen to recount a case in detail to give you an idea of how non-linear the restitution process is. Every case, I would remind you, for example, the Venus of Cyrene is an exception and has its own particularities. The stele dates back to the Axum kingdom, specifically to the period between the 1st and the 3rd century AD, and was intended to mark the presence of the cemetery area. The stele marked the high of the Aksumite kingdom, symbolizing pride and recalling the richness of Ethiopia's great history. The monument, 23.5 meters long and weighing 150 tons, was transported from Axum to Massawa, where it was taken by sea to Naples on the 27th March 1937. It was then erected in Rome in Piazza Capena and served as a pivot for the intersection of the axis of Via dei Trionfi with that of the Circo Massimo. Italy recognized Ethiopia's independence and sovereignty on the 10th February 1947. The peace treaties provided from the formal renunciation by Italy in favor of Ethiopia of all assets. The treaty text reads, within 18 months from the coming into force of the present treaty, Italy should restore all works of art, religious objects, archives, and objects of historical value belonging to Ethiopia or its nationals and removed from Ethiopia to Italy since October the 3rd, 1935. On the 5th of March 1956, the two countries signed the Friendship Agreement and stipulated in Annex C that the Italian government would take charge of dismantling and removing the stele from its present site and transporting it to Naples, delivering it to the free on-board carrier for transportation to Ethiopia. All costs associated with transporting the monolith to Naples, securing it and removing it were to be borne by the Italian government. The return was delayed, partly because of the outbreak of the Civil War in 1976, which ended in 1978. This period is remembered as the Ethiopian Red Terror, marked by the Mengistu military regime. On the 3rd March 1997, the Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs, Rino Serri, and the Deputy Head of Ethiopian Diplomacy, Tedeka Lemu, signed the agreement establishing the return of the stele to Ethiopia within the year. The return was interrupted by the outbreak of war between Eritrea and Ethiopia in the same year. In the following years, the Lazio Regional Administrative Court dealt with the case of the return of the stele. The opponents to the restitution based some of their arguments on the difficulty of transporting it, and therefore on the risk of ruining the stele. But in the night between the 27th and the 28th of May 2002, a lightning struck and ruined the top of the stele. This event, the fact that the stele had already been ruined, gave an additional reason to carry out the restitution. So in June 2005, the moving of the stele began, and now the stele is back, is returned to its own to its original site. The Aksum site has been on the UNESCO World Heritage List since 1980. Now, when objects cannot be returned, questions have to be asked about how they are displayed in museums. In conclusion, I would like to tell you about the case of a museum that has implemented interesting inclusion strategies, which can be taken as an example. The Switch Sharing a Word of Inclusion, Creativity and Heritage project brought together the European ethnographic museums, 10 European ethnographic museums, in collaboration to realize and share innovative museum experiences of sharing authorities. That means those practices involving cooperation with source communities and diasporas inhabiting Europe. These are the 10 museums institutions that collaborated in the project. The project, funded by the European Union, lasted 4 years from October 2014 to September 2018 and produced several exhibitions, among which the one at the Prehistoric Ethnographic Museum Luigi Pigorini, entitled The Making of a Point of View, spotlights on the Indonesian and Malaysian collections. In collaboration with Maxi's Public Engagement Department, the Luigi Pigorini Museum has succeeded in organizing a program of workshops with students from different backgrounds through the mediation of 2 centers for foreign minors living alone in Italy, Centro Stalli and Civico Zero. The process produced 4 installations, each one offering different points of view on a part of the museum's heritage. Objects in dialogue, narratives, origin of detail, objects in diaspora, recognitions, objects in transit, transformation. I'll be focusing on the installation Objects in Diaspora, recognition. It is a project of resignification of the objects. It means that the objects have had the opportunity to acquire their original meaning, the one that they had when they still belong to the culture of origin. It was created by 6 Indonesian assisted students. Together with the specialists, the students explored the museum's collections or the museum's collection holdings and chose some objects from the Indonesian collections as a starting point to tell their personal stories and experiences, reconnecting the heritage with their own lives. The aim is to create intercultural encounters, open dialogue, and knowledge through collaboration with the diaspora communities. Some objects turned out to be material manifestation of knowledge and cultural stories experienced by the students of their or by their ancestors. Here is an example. Ahmad Ana Sarfin, 24 years old, born in Kediri, East Java, Indonesia. I have been living in Rome for over 2 years to study mechanical engineering at Sapienza University. The Tau Tau is a statue representing the deceased person in the Toraja culture. My family and I believe in life after death, and the Tau Tau for us represent who have died in a small size. Videos and descriptive panels were displayed on these surfaces. In these videos, the subject tells his story about the object. The descriptive panel was also written by the students of the source community. This practice allowed the students to write an intimate and personal biography of the collections, inspired by the emotional resonance the objects triggered in them. The project has thus created contact zones with source communities. It created a space of consultation, discussion, and conflict resolution. This project also respects the principle of shared authorities indicated in the 2005 Faro Convention. Already in the prologue of the convention, there is an appeal to the need to involve every individual in the ongoing process of defining and managing cultural heritage. Thank you for your attention. I wait for your questions after Lina's presentation.
Thank you very much, Isabella, for your presentation. Yes, this is an interesting case about Libya. I haven't heard very much about it until now. So it was interesting to hear about that, and also about the project on how to give new significance to museum collections. And I think this is a great issue in many countries, also joint provenance research. And I think we will have a discussion later on these issues. And I'm also eager to hear maybe some examples from other people who are in our meeting.
I wait for you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So please, if you have any questions, keep them for a moment or share them in the chat, and we will come back later to you and have a nice discussion. So our next presentation is from Lina Lozano. Welcome, Lina. Great to have you here. Lina Maria Lozano Riaño was born in Colombia and raised in Barcelona, and now is based in the Netherlands. She has a BA in art history from Barcelona University and is currently ending her master's degree in art and society at the Utrecht University. She focuses her work on culture and education with the emphasis on decolonization, feminism, ethical concerns, and media. She has worked in different museums in Barcelona and is part of the ICOM SICA, the International Committee for Education and Cultural Action. And she is in the special interest group in learning and participating digitally. Okay, well, Lina, now I give the floor to you.
Thank
So,
you very much, Andrea. Let me start sharing my screen.
Great.
And, can you see it?
Yes, I can. Great.
So let me start. I want to thank you first for your kind introduction and for giving me the opportunity to share the insights of my research today with all of you. I also really enjoyed Isabella's presentation. It is particularly interesting to see the points in common that our research reveals, and also helps all of us to have a broader vision of the problem. And it's a very accurate work, so congratulations for that. Before starting, I would like to invite you all to feel free to give feedback on my research project, as I am still developing it, and it's a work in progress, although several ethical concerns can be drawn from it, and we will see it later. So let's gonna start. Can you see the next slide? Yeah, perfect. So, so I'm currently studying the factors at stake in the returning process of the so-called colonial heritage from the Netherlands to the ex-colonies, with the focus on the case of the Tropen Museum and Suriname. For those who are not familiar with the topic, the Tropen Museum is the name that would be translated into English as Museum of the Tropics, and it's situated in Amsterdam, and it was previously created as a colonial museum and was also called like that, like colonial museum of the Netherlands. And Suriname, as you might note, it's a small country situated in the global south, bordering with the two Guyanas and Brazil, which capital is Paramaribo, and that achieved its independence in the 1875 from the Netherlands after being several hundred years under Dutch but also British domination. So I decided to be involved in this research since the media made a great echo saying that the Dutch government planned to conduct a massive return of about 450,000 pieces linked to the colonial past, and the pieces involved are the ones that are under the umbrella of the National Museum van Wereldculturen, which is the National Museum of World Cultures. And these institutions covers different museums, and one of them is the Tropen Museum, that it's in Amsterdam, as I told before, but also the African Museum in Berdenal and the Volkenkunde Museum, which is the National Museum of Ethnology in Leeuwarden. So the new also mentioned that there will be a committee formed by the government in order to carry out the return of the pieces in a 4-year period. And it will be created with the aim of repair the colonial past and provide a solution to a problem that has been pointed out several decades now. And finally, the media also commented on the creation of a group called Pressing Matter that will be created with the aim of conduct provenance research and cultural value research of the pieces. So after reading this, I found this news quite appealing, and I decided to start my master thesis around it. Also because this is a phenomenon around colonial objects in possession of European museums is a worldwide issue that currently resonates in many places, as Isabella told us, in Italy, but also Belgium is developing policies, Germany is developing policies, among others. And also there are a lot of claimant voices of the diasporas from the global south that have been raised around this topic. So when I started my research, I found that this research that I mentioned before, that is called Pressing Matter, was paused, and it's still paused. It was supposed to start this year with the whole research, but it is paused. So therefore, I decided to focus my research topic around the different parts who play a role in the return process, putting the focus on an institutional level, taking into account the Dutch institutions, but also the Surinamese institutions, and in addition, highlighting the voices of the Surinamese communities, who to me seem to have been given a marginal role when I started my research. So let's gonna go for the next diapo. So when it comes to see why is the government announcement such an important
Lina, we cannot hear anymore. I think.
Yeah, I didn't hear you anymore. But now I hear you. Now I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, just go back a little bit.
A little bit. So
two phrases.
sorry, I was talking about the cases of return, that it's very important, why to talk about why it's very important the government announcement, because we need to take a look back. We need to take into account that the returns that have been carried out between the Netherlands and the ex-colonies during all those years have been very low, rather marginal. So Jos van Boerden, one of the experts in this field, came to this conclusion, to the conclusion of that the returns have been rather marginal, after made a study in which he collected the numbers of returns that have been made between 1970 and 2015. And he had found that only 45 pieces had been returned to their original countries, not only Suriname, but many Dutch ex-colonies, meaning that less than one piece per year was returned in 41 years. Whereas if we put in comparison this with the objects that have been returned when we talk about Nazi expoliative art, there is a significant difference, because as from 2002 to 2011, there have been 99 returns. So therefore, 99 returns in 9 years, leading to the conclusion that this number had never been increased, the colonial returns during the years, and that more efficiently policies were made for the returning of Nazi expoliated arts rather than colonial heritage. So, and if we take a look in the Surinamese case, this is even less significant, because when it comes to Suriname, only there are two remarkable examples of return. One in 2012, when there was agreed that the return of important archive to the ex-colony, and in 2006, when the Tropen Museum decided to return 45 works to the National Museum in Paramaribo. So the highest number of returns has occurred between the Netherlands and Indonesia, and it has been in the 1970s. So, and from that moment, the Netherlands never had reached a peak of such a massive return. And also, we have to take into account that Indonesia is the former colony with the highest amount of pieces collected in the Netherlands, so that are in the Netherlands territory. So let's gonna go for the particularities that we can see in the Surinamese case. Because Suriname is an special case with respect to other countries, such as Indonesia, as I said before. To begin with, the colonizers, the colonizers attached less importance to the historical and cultural treasures that were in this ex-colony, which means that they consider, for instance, Indonesian art as high art, but Surinamese art popular art. So therefore, the transfers to the Netherlands were less compared to others. And furthermore, there have been like several agreements between both countries, but culturally and historical treasures never have been a part of it. So therefore, there are no policies in this topic. So rather than, if we compare it to Indonesia, that has had a much longer history of a struggle to recover the heritage, we can see how the efforts were made to create treaties and laws in order to keep the heritage in Indonesia, even when they were still under the colonial period. And secondly, what happens with Suriname is that relatively few people were involved in protecting cultural heritage throughout the history. That's what Jos van Boerden said in his research, and the relationship between the colony and the ex-colony and the Netherlands was more related, built up, at an economical level, economical agreements between both countries. So nowadays, the number of pieces that are held by the institutions of the National Museum of Verkulturen is smaller. It's having a conversation with the person who has been the main curator of this collection in the last few years, and until last year, he told me that the museum houses about 9,000 pieces, and that the museum has practically the notion of the origin of the vast majority of them, so they really know where they come from, or at least this is what they say in their researches. And also he told me that the objects are considered to have a casual character, because we are talking about dishes and little plates, bracelets. So these objects are considered yeah, that have a casual characters that are and also they are also repeated. So let's say that the importance that they have in comparison with the objects of other collections, such as the Indonesian one, is small. So and also it is important to note that the chief curators, sorry, also mentioned that only 10% of these objects, of the 9,000 objects that are from Suriname, only 10% of these objects have been exhibited over more than 10 years. So this is also something that we have to take into account, that it's a very, very low number of objects that have been exhibited after all these several years. And that's gonna change because I think we also need to take a look into the laws that are involved in these processes. If we take a look into the last policies that have been developed in the Netherlands, we will encounter two main reports that are the most important ones nowadays. The first one is from the National Museum van Werelculturen, the National Museum of World Cultures, that issued a report in 2019 in which it presented the steps that need to be followed by the claimants to claim the pieces in their collections. And the institutions develop its own policies before the government and propose a policy where we can remark some things, such as, for instance, the claimant needs to have the support of an institution to proceed to a request, that cooperation between two parties need to be a must, that they will carry out provenance research, that they will lead it, and also they will have an external commission who will present the results to the government, because the ultimate response is from the government. They decide either if the piece is returned or not. So, and also with the particularity that that these deals can also be modified anytime in the future. So the report gave the possibility to return the pieces, but from my point of view, wait for the Dutch former ex-colonies to knock at the door to claim the pieces. And then the second report to be taken into account is the one of the Cultural Council of the Netherlands, the Cultural Council of the Netherlands developed. They made a guidance on the way forward for colonial collections called Colonial Collections and Recognitions of Justice. Mainly they were a committee that developed an individual policy or an individual guidance to guide the government into which are the steps that needed to be taken into account when talking about the returns processes. So it is a very complete guide which collects all of the points to be taken into account in this conflict, which are loads of things: returns, colonial past, policies, and shows a very open attitude to return the pieces, and also includes one of the most relevant data that I wanted to share with you also. They carry out a survey with many different museums in the Netherlands that house colonial collections, and quite surprisingly, the result was that only 10% of these museums that were surveyed had a good overview of the provenance of their colonial works, so that they really know where those objects are from, while a 43% had done only exploratory research, so basic research, we will say. 13 had done a systematic review, and other 34 had not yet done any provenance research, and this type of research also was not on their agendas either. So this is also a very important numbers that need to be taken into account, because we see that the lack of knowledge that there is in the Netherlands about the provenance of these objects. So that's why the Netherlands has invested or wanted to invest a high amount of money in this research group called Pressing Matter that seeks to discover the provenance of all these objects in a period of 4 years. So, but provenance research is a little bit tricky, and there are a lot of ethical aspects around provenance research that we can discuss, and I would like to discuss also here with all of you, because there are voices that are not particularly supportive of provenance research, especially one looks at this conflict concerning African diaspora's voices, They say that in many occasions it only slows down the process of returning the objects, when in some cases it is very well known that these objects were illegally extracted from the country. And they also point out examples in which the provenance research has not been carried out in a rigorous manner. They also point that the return of the pieces always had to be under the European logic, so they do not agree with that, which often the ex-colonies do not connect, because also this type of research leave aside the sentimental value of the piece, and this is something that they really value. These voices also point out that sometimes museums seems to compete to be the first one to know to see who is the first one to develop policies regarding colonial heritage, and may fall into a competitive race to win certain kind of prestige. However, if we talk with museum experts, it is very important to them to know where these pieces will be returned, so as not to leave them in the wrong hands. But the voices, the country voices also defend that many times. These voices also defend, the voices from the experts defend that many times there are already internal conflicts in the ex-colonies, and they do not want to create even a greater inequality, especially when it comes to deal with the return of indigenous species. However, the opposing voices said that this is a problem that the countries themselves need to solve, because it's their own pieces. Because if not, what we produce or what it is produced by this kind of museums is a paternalistic act. And the last point of the diaspora's points, and I wanted to comment also, is that the question that they need always to, there's always need to be cooperation once the object has been recovered. And they point out that perhaps even the countries of the ex-colonies may have the right not to want to cooperate once the pieces have been returned. And is in this way, for them, it would stimulate a flow of researches to the global south to be able to study those pieces with the subsequent economic benefit for the country, and not the other way around as we are used to see. However, if we look at cases of countries such like Suriname, where the economic power to carry out this process, especially in the indigenous communities, is null, the countries have no choice but to cooperate with either, if they want to be able to recover their objects. And that was from that was everything. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you have enjoyed. And and I'm wishing to hear your feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lina, for your presentation.